Hi, my name is Dr. Corliss Brown Thompson, and I'm going to be talking with you a little bit today about program evaluation in preparation for an upcoming workshop on Tuesday. So first, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I am a faculty member at Northeastern University. I teach master's and doctoral level students in education. I also am a program evaluator. I've been evaluating programs since 2009. I've worked on lots of different types of program evaluations, including AmeriCorps. Also, I've worked on program evaluation for different teacher education programs at universities, for STEM programs within universities. I've also worked with school districts on program evaluation in various subject areas. Before I did program evaluation, I was an AmeriCorps member with Scale, and I worked in the America Reads program as a minimum time member. I also am a former elementary teacher. I used to teach third grade. So what are our objectives for this session? What do we want to accomplish? So on Tuesday, we're going to have a lot to do. So the purpose of me talking to you a little bit now is to kind of get some of the boring me talking at you stuff out the way, so that when we meet together on Tuesday, we can jump right into the more action-oriented items of data collection for your program evaluation. We want to define evaluation. We want to talk about the goals, activities, and outcomes of North Carolina Literacy Corps. And we also want to describe the connection between programmatic activities and data collection. And I think I just hit something to mess this up. Let me try again. Sorry. All right. So what is program evaluation? So program evaluation seeks to answer questions about programs that interest program staff, participants, funders, and the public. Basically, any program that you do, any kind of activity that you do, there's intentions behind those activities. Most of the times when we do things, especially programming, we're doing it for a reason. Program evaluation helps to determine if you're actually meeting those intended objectives or the reasons behind your activities. It also helps to see, are you doing what you said you were going to do with the money that you were granted or with the resources that you were granted? So who's interested in program evaluation? Program staff, participants. Program staff wants to know, is what they're doing working? Participants want to know, again, is what I'm participating in, is it effective? Or how can I give my feedback to make what I'm participating in more effective? The people that are funding the programs want to know where their money's going. Is it doing what they would hope it would do? And then also the public is interested in this. Public is connected in a lot of ways to funders, especially for AmeriCorps, because it's funded through tax dollars. So we'll talk a little bit more about that and how that affects you at the end of the presentation. So part of program evaluation is program monitoring. It doesn't matter if we measure outcomes and objectives if we don't actually know that the activities are being done. So, let's say that this whole program is founded on this idea of literacy tutoring. But if nobody's getting tutored, it doesn't make sense for us to start measuring how much growth students actually participated in. The first step is to actually make sure that tutoring is actually happening and how often it's happening. And then we could even take it to another level of how well is it happening. It's one thing to throw together a crummy tutoring session. It's another thing to engage students in something that's meaningful to them in terms of their reading growth. So program monitoring really helps us figure out, are the activities actually happening? So programmatic activity should be documented. Is the program doing what it's funded to do? And it's also related directly to the day-to-day functions of program personnel. So if I do a tutoring session, there's got to be a way for me to monitor that or to demonstrate that that actually happened. And so as a Literacy Corps member, one of your primary responsibilities is going to be to monitor and document programmatic activities. All right, so the other part of another part of program evaluation, in addition to monitoring and documenting that these things are happening, it goes back to this idea, okay, we're doing these different activities. We want to see some type of effect out of it. If we're doing these tutoring sessions, we want to see that, students are actually learning. That's what we want. We want people to learn how to read better. So how do we know that they're actually learning how to read better? Well, those things have to be measured. And so each activity that is conducted, I keep using tutoring as an example. There are other examples, but I know that that's near and dear to the heart of this program. Each activity is going to have an intended outcome. So for tutoring, again, what's the intended outcome? An increase in reading ability. So we need to measure, did reading ability actually increase? So for a literacy core, you're required to measure performance measures, or you're required to look at performance measures. And these are basically the goals that are set for the intended outcomes. For example, the whole program might have a goal to increase reading levels for 500 elementary school students or something like that. That's not the actual performance measure. Brenna is going to talk to you more about performance measures, but I wanted to go ahead and kind of give you the heads up that the performance measures are really taking a look at, did we meet the goals that that AmeriCorps has actually set for us? Were we able to increase the literacy of this many students? Were we able to increase the literacy of this many adults? Were we able to help, this many volunteers? Those kind of things are going to be measured. And as an AmeriCorps member, you help gather that data. All right, so AmeriCorps members and evaluation. What exactly is your role in this? Well, North Carolina Literacy Corps is responsible for monitoring and evaluating its work. Each site and each program is responsible for monitoring, collecting data, and reporting programmatic activities. And each Literacy Corps member is also responsible for a part of this evaluation. So, still we're wondering, okay, what exactly do I have to do? And I really want you to understand the big picture. And we're going to get to the more specifics of what you have to do, but I'm a big believer in that if you at least can understand the framing, then when you are asked to do specific things, hopefully it'll make a little more sense. And of course, we'll clear up any confusion tomorrow. So what are the steps of program evaluation? The first step is to have an evaluation plan. Everything that you're asked to collect, there should be a reason for it. I'm a big believer in, if you ask somebody to collect or to give you some data, give you some information, there should be a reason for it. There should be a way that that data is going to be used. If not, then why are we doing it? So a big part of program evaluation planning is really taking a look at all of the different activities, all of the different outcomes, and then how can we monitor those activities? How can we measure the outcomes? Second step is the data collection. So monitoring activities, what are we going to collect? Do we need to take up agendas? Do we need to take attendance? Do we need to give somebody a survey? Do we need to give somebody a test? And then after you collect the data, it's going to be analyzed and reported. So in this particular picture, I have evaluation planning and data collection larger because that's where the bulk of your work is, especially in that data collection section. All right, so evaluation planning. There's two major goals for all Literacy Corps members. The first goal is to support volunteer management. Volunteer management are things like recruiting volunteers, training volunteers, helping to retain the volunteers that are already part of the program. And then also the second goal is to have direct and indirect service with participants. So some of you will be working directly with participants. You'll actually be tutoring participants. Some of you will be working directly with participants tutoring, and you'll be training volunteers to also work directly with students. So when I say direct service, that's, you're actual sitting down with a student. Indirect service, that's if I train somebody to work with a student, then I'm still touching that student, but in a more indirect way. So the other thing that you'll consider is, what are we going to monitor? What data are we going to collect? And we're going to help you with those particular pieces. The requirements are the same across each site, but each site is different, so it's going to look a little bit different. And so the planning comes into play, where you have to really listen to kind of what's required by AmeriCorps, and then go back to your site and say, okay, given what's required by AmeriCorps, what does this mean for our site? All right, so volunteer evaluation planning. As I mentioned, part of your role is to determine what does your site look like? How is your site unique? And regarding volunteer management, you need to think about what does your volunteer programming look like. Some sites are going to work on systems for tracking volunteer data. Other sites are going to work on volunteer retention. And so you need to determine with your site what exactly needs to be done. One thing that all sites will have in common is recruiting and training volunteers. Every site, I think, needs volunteers, or they already have volunteers that you're going to be working with. And then training volunteers on how to teach people how to read, how to work on writing, race and diversity trainings, things like that. So what are some of the things that need to be monitored for volunteers? Names, got to keep track of names. We've got to keep track of how many people or how many hours volunteers are working. Remember, monitoring is all about, are we doing what we said we're going to do? And so your task is to bring in volunteers to help tutor students. You've got to demonstrate that you actually had volunteers, like real live people, and they actually spent time with the students. So you've got to keep up with their names, who they are, how long they're working with students. Did they go to trainings? Keeping things like agendas for the trainings that you plan, attendance, recruitment activities. Basically, you need to come up with a system of documenting all of these things that you're doing on a daily basis and that other people in your site are doing related to volunteer work. For K through 12 and adult participants, so the people that are being tutored, what do you need to monitor for them? Well, same thing. We need to know that you actually had real live kids or real live adults that were participating in these tutoring sessions. How many? So we want to know what are their names or what are their ID numbers if you can't share their names for privacy reasons. Tutoring sessions, were they tutored for 1 hour or were they tutored for 50 hours? It makes a difference in, the type of impact the program's having on them. So we've got to monitor that. Also, the recruitment activities. Do we only have 2 students or do we have 500? Those kind of things all need to be monitored. All right, once we have a system in place for kind of monitoring and keeping track of all of the different pieces of our programming, we want to collect data about how the programming is actually working. Is it having the kind of impact we want it to have on our students or our participants? Same thing with the volunteers. Do they have what they need so that they can volunteer well? So we're going to collect surveys. And from participants, you'll be asked to do surveys with them or some type of test or assessment with them to really measure, is the program actually doing what we would intend it to do? All right, so immediate data collection. So you are early involved with that immediate on-the-ground data collection. And that data collection occurs at the level of the participant. So at some of your sites, when people come through the door, you'll need to register. You'll need to register them. Do you have a registration form? What is your system for registering participants? Beta test is a type of literacy assessment that's done with K through 12 learners, giving learners the test. Or if you're working with volunteers, training volunteers to give learners the test, giving out volunteer satisfaction surveys, and collecting attendance. All right, so those were some of the kind of data collection activities that you're going to be doing as part of program evaluation. Remember, program evaluation, we're just taking a look at what are the activities of the program that you're responsible for, documenting, monitoring that those things are actually being done, and then measuring the impact or measuring the effect of those activities that you're doing. That's kind of the big picture overview. So what's next? What are we going to do with all of this tomorrow? So tomorrow we will talk some about evaluation planning, just figuring out, how do I approach all of this in my particular site? We will also spend a lot of time talking about data collection. So I threw a lot at you about surveys and assessments, agendas, attendance. On Tuesday, you should walk away with the beginnings of a plan for all of the data that will need to be collected, what all those different types of data are, and how to create a plan at your site for getting all of the data collected. So tomorrow, we're really going to focus on this kind of entire cycle of evaluation, but we really are going to focus on, again, evaluation planning and primarily the data collection pieces. All right, so this seems like a lot of effort. Why are we doing this again? I think especially if you're not familiar with program evaluation, it may seem like a lot of effort. Some of you probably have had to do a lot of these tasks before. But why is it important? Why does it matter? So again, back from slide 4, who is interested in program evaluation? Funders and the public. So aside from it just being good practice, all of us have been in programs and situations, even in a classroom with a professor, and we weren't getting what we needed out of it, and it wasn't working for us. Program managers have a responsibility to know if the program is working for their participants or not. If it's not working, then things can be done to change it or fix it, but only if we have the data that suggests, oh, wow, we need to do something. And then also data that can help us figure out, okay, what do we need to change? So again, it's just good practice. But then also I have highlighted funders and the public. So for this particular program, AmeriCorps, it's funded through the federal government. The federal government actually has federal code that says these programs have to be evaluated. And that's part of accountability. I mean, it's accountability, I think, all the way from the programs that are receiving AmeriCorps members to help them work through these issues, all the way up to the granting agency that's giving the money to scale to help support these members and support training. It's basically an accountability mechanism to make sure that the money that's being spent is actually being spent well. And then also the public, because this is a federally funded program, people's tax dollars are going into this. I mean, if you have an AmeriCorps program and you find out that, we don't actually know the students that are participating, or maybe, people didn't collect the data on it, so maybe we just made something up and it's not real data. All of those things have big consequences in place. I think not just for the programs that eventually won't get funded and don't get the money because they didn't follow the processes of really documenting the work that they were doing, but the kids that don't get the tutoring, the participants that don't get what they need. And then also, I think programs such as AmeriCorps overall, I think the program evaluation really kind of helps the public, helps the government, see why these types of activities are valuable and important. So Brenna is going to talk with you more about expectations of the funders. She's going to talk with you more about performance measures and why all of this program evaluation work is so important. And then the other thing that I would just like to encourage you to consider, and why all this is important, is that for your future development, whatever, career step is next for you, this type of work of documenting programmatic activities, measuring programmatic activities is applicable in all different types of fields. So definitely keep track of what you're doing, keep track of what you're learning as you're kind of thinking about how AmeriCorps is going to position you for whatever it is that you want to do next. Your program evaluation work is definitely an important step of skill development. All right, so I think that is it for now. And tomorrow we will pick up with kind of what you took from this video, and then we will jump right into volunteer management and how to make sense of all of these different pieces that you're doing with volunteers and the data that you're going to collect. Then we will talk about your participants, how we're going to collect data from them, and then we'll talk about other data collection mechanisms, and we'll also talk about next steps that you want to do once you begin working with your sites. All right, I look forward to meeting everyone on Tuesday, and with that, I will talk with you all soon.